For make no mistake, these post-Marxian creatures would be deprived of all human interrelations that make up a society. These complete individuals would be deprived of law, family, custom, religion, and, of course, of all exchange of goods and services. That is, they would be complete, hermetically sealed creatures, each isolated from everyone else. Ironically, then, leftists who habitually, though falsely, denounce individualist thinkers for advocating a world of isolated, atomistic, hermetically sealed individuals, themselves worship a theorist whose vision of the ideal future is precisely of such a monstrous world. At the same time, of course, each will have the consolation of knowing that they are all trivial particles in a mighty collective organism, now united with itself, and that any vagueness or inconsistency in this picture will be resolved by the sorcery of the dialectic, in which all contradictions transcend their negations into a higher unity. What will allegedly be left to man under communism is a new and bizarre form of art, or aesthetics. Man will be stripped of wealth and possessions, but he will be far richer in another sense, unalienated and fulfilling himself in all directions. He will approach his own creations rich in the appreciation of beauty. He will be, in the words of Marx in Private Property and Communism, a rich man profoundly endowed with all the senses. He will realize his natural tendency to arrange all things according to the laws of beauty. Until communism, man's appreciation of beauty had been sullied by greed and possession. But for Marx, possessing, implies the simple alienation of all the physical and spiritual human senses. Professor Tucker, who has done much to explicate Marx's vision of communism, concludes that economic activity will turn into artistic activity, and the planet itself will become the new man's work of art. The alienated world will give way to the aesthetic world. But if ultimate communism abandons and eliminates all sense of having, of ownership, in order to liberate man for purely aesthetic creation and contemplation, then communism itself must be transcended, since even communism implies some form of having or possessing. As Tucker points out, consequently the final condition of man will be beyond all ownership, beyond the property principle, and, in this sense, beyond communism. Hence Marx ends his fullest discussion of communism, in Private Property and Communism, with these faintly ominous sentences. Communism is the position as the negation of the negation, and hence the actual phase necessary for the next stage of historical development in the process of human emancipation and recovery. Communism is the necessary pattern and the dynamic principle of the immediate future, but communism as such is not the goal of human development, the structure of human society. So what is the final stage, even beyond communism, the final Aufhebung, the great transcendence, the ultimate negation? It is a world beyond all ownership and all possession, a world fully liberated for the spontaneous flowering of all faculties in all directions, and for the unsullied, totally sensate appreciation of pure beauty. We may be pardoned for concluding that, wittingly or unwittingly, and with Marx it is difficult to know which, the final stage is the stage of the graveyard for the human race. After the turmoil and upheaval of all the Aufhebungs will come the peace of a universal cemetery. For no possession, no use of resources, means rapid and universal starvation. Deprived of all labor for productive goals and of all possessions, mankind will have precious little time left for the appreciation of pure beauty. Whether or not they saw the full horror of Marx's ultimate positive humanism, there is no doubt that the Soviets were always uneasy at the thought of this abyss. The Soviet editor of a Russian translation of Marx's manuscripts, published in 1956, on analyzing the above passage, asserts that by communism as such, Marx meant raw communism of the initial stage. But this is almost a willful misinterpretation of Marx's final words on beyond the ultimate stage. The Soviets had trouble enough with the withering away of the state in the highest stage of communism, which to them meant at most a shift from official state ownership of all resources to ownership by social or administrative organizations, officially proclaimed as non-states. The reason that Marx suppressed the publication of this essay in his lifetime seems similar to the Soviets' burying of their allegedly final goal. To say that even the Marxist public is not yet ready for it is a rich understatement. One trusts that they never will be. In socialist practice, of course, while communist countries never got to the highest stage, there seemed to be little evidence of either a notable appreciation of beauty or of great spontaneous or artistic creativity. Perhaps even the relative physical deprivation, rather than the rapid and absolute starvation of beyond communism of 20th century socialist regimes, was responsible for the gray and grim cast universally acknowledged to pervade these countries. But of course all these problems are neatly buried by the pervasive but implicit premise underlying all of Marx's discussions of communism. The unsupported, unquestioned assumption that throughout all these changes, production remains happily abundant, if not superabundant. Hence, the economic problem is simply and quietly assumed away. Some might protest that in our discussion of communism we have not mentioned the feature that is generally considered the hallmark of that system. The slogan, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. This phrase seems to contradict our view that the essence of the communist society is a secularized religion rather than economics. The locus classicus, however, of Marx's proclamation of this well-known slogan of French socialism was in the course of his vitriolic Critique of the Gotha program in 1875, in which Marx denounced the Lassallean deviationists who were forming the new German Social Democratic Party, and it is clear from the context of his discussion that this slogan is of minor and peripheral importance to Marx. In point 3 of his critique, Marx is denouncing the clause of the program calling for communization of property and equitable distribution of the proceeds of labor. In the course of his discussion, Marx states that inequality of labor income is inevitable in the first stage of communist society, when it has just emerged after prolonged birth pangs from capitalist society. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society, and the cultural development thereby determined. On the other hand, Marx goes on, in a higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of individuals under division of labor, and therewith also the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after the productive forces have also increased with the all-round development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be fully left behind, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs. It should be evident from this passage and its context that Marx's final sentence, far from being the point and the culmination of his discussion, was stated briefly only to be dismissed. What Marx is saying is that the key to the communist world is not any such principle of the distribution of goods, but the eradication of the division of labor, the all-round development of individual faculties, and the resulting flow of superabundance. In such a world, the famous slogan becomes of only trivial importance. Indeed, Marx proceeds immediately after this passage to denounce talk among socialists of equal right and equitable distribution as ideological nonsense about right and other trash common among the Democrats and French socialists. He then quickly adds that it was, in general, incorrect to make a fuss about so-called distribution and put the principal stress on it. The absolute misery and horror of the ultimate stage, and a fortiori of the beyond ultimate stage of communism, should now be all too apparent. The eradication of the division of labor would quickly bring starvation and economic misery to all. The abolition of all structures of human interrelation would bring enormous social and spiritual deprivation to every person. And even the alleged artistic, intellectual, and creative development of all man's faculties in all directions would be totally crippled by the ban on all specialization. How can true intellectual development or creation come without concentrated effort? In short, the terrible economic suffering of mankind under communism would be fully matched by its intellectual and spiritual deprivation. Considering the nature and consequences of communism, to call this horrific dystopia a noble and humanist ideal can at best be considered a grisly joke in questionable taste. The prevalent notion, for example, that Marxian communism is a glorious ideal for man, perverted by the later Engels or by Lenin or Stalin, can now be put into proper perspective. None of the horrors committed by Lenin, Stalin, or other Marxist-Leninist regimes can match the monstrousness of Marx's communist ideal. Perhaps the closest approximation was the short-lived communist regime of Pol Pot in Cambodia, which, in attempting to abolish the division of labor, managed to enforce the outlawry of money, so that for their tiny rations the populace was totally dependent upon the niggardly largesse of the communist cadre. Moreover, they attempted to eliminate the contradictions between town and country by following the Engels goal of destroying large cities and by coercively depopulating the capital, Phnom Penh, overnight. In a few short years, the Pol Pot group managed to exterminate 1/3 of the Cambodian population, perhaps a record in genocide. Since under ideal communism everyone could and would have to do everything, it is clear that even before universal starvation set in, very little could get done. To Marx himself, all differences among individuals were contradictions to be eliminated under communism, so that presumably the mass of individuals would have to be uniform and interchangeable. Whereas Marx apparently postulated normal intellectual capabilities even under communism, to later Marxists it seems that difficulties could be alleviated by the emergence of superhuman beings. To Karl Kautsky, 1854 to 1938, the German Marxist who assumed the mantle of the top leadership of Marxism upon the death of Engels in 1895, under communism, a new type of man will arise, a superman, an exalted man. Leon Trotsky waxed even more lyrical. Man will become incomparably stronger, wiser, finer, his body more harmonious, his movements more rhythmical, his voice more musical. The human average will rise to the level of an Aristotle, a Goethe, a Marx. Above these other heights, new peaks will rise. If the beyond ultimate stage of communism ever lasts long enough to breed a new super race, we may safely leave it to the communist theoreticians of that future day to resolve the problem of whether the contradiction of permitting a super Aristotle to tower over an Aristotle may be allowed to exist. Neither should libertarians be taken in by the Marxian goal of the withering away of the state under communism, or, in the use of the phrase, borrowed from the cherished aim of the French free market libertarians Charles Comte and Charles Dunoyer, a world where the government of persons is replaced by the administration of things. There are two major flaws in this formulation from the laissez-faire libertarian viewpoint. First, of course, as the Russian anarcho-communist Mikhail Bakunin, 1814-1876, insistently pointed out, it is absurd to try to reach statelessness via the absolute maximization of state power in a totalitarian dictatorship of the proletariat, or, more realistically, a select vanguard of the said proletariat. The result can only be maximum statism, and hence maximum slavery. As perhaps the first of the new class theorists, and anticipating the iron law of oligarchy of Michel and Mosca, Bakunin prophetically warned that a minority ruling class will once again, after the Marxian Revolution, rule the majority. But the Marxists say this minority will consist of the workers. Yes, no doubt, of former workers, who, as soon as they become governors or representatives of the people, cease to be workers and start looking down on the working masses from the heights of state authority, so that they represent not the people, but themselves and their own claim to rule over others. Anyone who can doubt this knows nothing of human nature. The terms scientific socialist and scientific socialism, which we meet incessantly in the works and speeches of the Marxists, are sufficient to prove that the so-called people's state will be nothing but a despotism over the masses, exercised by a new and quite small aristocracy of real or bogus scientists. They, the Marxists, claim that only dictatorship, their own, of course, can bring the people freedom. We reply that a dictatorship can have no other aim than to perpetuate itself, and that it can engender and foster nothing but slavery in the people subjected to it. Freedom can be created only by freedom. Indeed, only a believer in the preposterous necromancy of the dialectic could believe otherwise. That is, could believe that a totalitarian state can inevitably and virtually instantly be transformed into its opposite, and that therefore the way to get rid of the state is to work as hard as possible to maximize its power. But the problem of the dialectic is not the only, indeed not even the main problem with Marxian communism. For Marxism shares with the anarchists a grave problem of the higher stage of pure communism, assuming for a moment that it could ever be reached. The crucial point is that both for anarchists and for Marxists, ideal communism is a world without private property, and that all property and resources will be owned and controlled in common. Indeed, the anarcho-communists' major complaint against the state is that it is allegedly the main enforcer and guarantor of private property, and therefore that to abolish private property, the state must also be eradicated. The truth, of course, is precisely the opposite. The state, through history, has been the main despoiler and plunderer of private property. With private property mysteriously abolished, then, the elimination of the state under communism, of either the Marxian or anarchist variety, would necessarily be a mere camouflage for a new state that would emerge to control and make decisions for community-owned resources. Except that the state would not be called such, but rather renamed something like a People's Statistical Bureau, as has already been done in Gaddafi's Libya, and armed with precisely the same powers. It will be a small consolation to future victims, incarcerated or shot for committing capitalist acts between consenting adults, to cite a phrase made popular by Robert Nozick, that their oppressors will no longer be the state, but only a People's Statistical Bureau. The state under any other name will smell as acrid. Furthermore, it will be inevitable under the iron law of oligarchy that world communal decisions will have to be undertaken by a specialized elite, so that the ruling class will inevitably reappear under Bakuninite as well as any other form of communism. And as we have indicated, in the beyond communism stage, the stage of universal no ownership, and therefore of no action and no use of resources, death for the entire human race would swiftly ensue. Marx and his followers have never demonstrated any awareness of the vital importance of the problem of allocation of scarce resources. Their vision of communism is that all such economic problems are trivial, requiring neither entrepreneurship nor a price system, nor genuine economic calculation, that all problems could be quickly solved by mere accounting or recording. The classic absurdity on this matter was laid down by Lenin, who accurately expressed Marx's view in declaring that the functions of entrepreneurship and of allocation of resources have been simplified by capitalism to the utmost, to mere matters of accounting, and to the extraordinarily simple operations of watching, recording, and issuing receipts, within the reach of anybody who can read and write and knows the first 4 rules of arithmetic. Ludwig von Mises wryly and justly comments that Marxists and other socialists have had no greater perception of the essentials of economic life than the errand boy, whose only idea of the work of the entrepreneur is that he covers pieces of paper with letters and figures. It is perhaps all too fitting that we now find that the idea of communism as a simple problem of bookkeeping and registration was perhaps originated by the French apocalyptic fantast and inspirer of Marx, Théodore Desamis. 4. Arriving at communism. Karl Marx had a crucial problem. He was not interested, as were the scorned utopian socialists, in merely exhorting everyone to adopt the communist path to a perfect society. He did not propose to leave the attainment of communism to the imperfect free wills of mankind. He demanded a certain inevitable path, a law of history that would demonstrate the absolute inevitability of history's reaching its final glory in a communist society. But here he was at a disadvantage relative to the various Christian wings of messianic communism. For unlike them, there was here no inevitable Messiah to arrive and usher in a kingdom of God on earth. As in the case of the post-mills, however, it was up to mankind, rather than the Messiah, to establish the kingdom. Even without a Messiah, a vigilant and growing vanguard could establish the kingdom, and the vanguard could even help in various pre-mill versions of millennialism, so that leadership by a dedicated vanguard was very much in the messianic tradition. As Professor Tucker points out, Marx was not lacking a moral theory. He was definitely a moralist, but a highly curious one. In his mythic vision, the good, The moral consists of participating in the inevitable triumph of the proletarian revolution, while the bad, or immoral, is trying to obstruct it. The answer to the question as to what should be done is given in the mythic vision itself, and can be summed up in a single word: participate. So Marx says that it is not a matter of bringing some utopian system or other into being, that is, of defining a social goal and purposefully endeavoring to realize it, but simply of consciously participating in the historical revolutionary process of society, which is taking place before our very eyes. Thus, to be moral means to be progressive, to be in tune with the inevitable future workings of the laws of history, whereas the harshest condemnation is reserved for those who are reactionary, who dare to obstruct, even with partial success, such alleged predestined turns of events. Thus, Marxists are particularly vehement in denouncing revolutionary moments in which the existing rule of progressives is replaced by reactionaries, and the clock is, miraculously, in the metaphor of historicist inevitability, turned back. For example, the Franco Revolution against the Spanish Republic and Pinochet's overthrow of Allende in Chile. But if a certain change is truly inevitable, why is it important for human agency to lend a hand, indeed to struggle mightily on its behalf? Here we turn to the critical matter of timing. While a change may be inevitable, the intervention of man can and will speed up this most desired of happenings. Man can function, in one of Marx's favorite obstetrical metaphors, as a midwife of history. Man's intervention could give the inevitable a helpful push. Yet Marx's obstetrical analogies are only a feeble attempt to evade the self-contradiction between the idea of inevitability and action to achieve the inevitable. For according to Marx, the timing as well as the nature of events is determined by the material dialectic of history. Socialism is brought about, wrote Marx in Capital, by the operation of the immanent laws of capitalistic production itself. As von Mises points out, to Marx, ideas, political parties, and revolutionary actions are merely superstructural. They can neither delay nor accelerate the march of history. Socialism will come when the material conditions for its appearance will have matured in the womb, obstetrics again, of capitalist society, neither sooner or later. If Marx had been consistent, he would not have embarked upon any political activity. He would have waited quietly for the day on which the knell of private capitalist property sounds. Marx might not have been logical or consistent, but his attitude was squarely in the millennialist tradition. As Professor Tuvison points out, several characteristics of historical communist movements recall millenarian agitations. There is, for one, the well-known fanaticism of millenarian believers, the firm conviction that a sequence of events leading to universal redemption is ordained or determined, would seem to lead to passivity on the part of an individual. But, characteristically, there is a vitally important qualification. Although the series of events is prophesied, their timing may be retarded by the failure of mankind. To delay the coming of redemption, then, is a great sin against one's fellow beings, against posterity, against the power that has ordained events. But wholehearted, zealous participation in the historically determined duties, doing what the old millenarians would call doing God's will, gives special éclat. In most millenarian groups there is something corresponding to the Communist Party. In Revelation itself, there are the 144,000, the first fruits unto God and to the Lamb, who are without guile, for they are without fault before the throne of God. Revelation 14, verses 4 through 5. Thus the whole proletariat, like the whole body of the saved, is without damning fault, but the specially distinguished group are chosen from the chosen. But there was still a remaining problem. Whence comes the inevitability in the Marxian schema? The proof that his cherished communist ideal would inevitably, scientifically arrive would occupy Marx for the rest of his life. Certainly he found the outlines of such proof in the mysterious workings of the Hegelian dialectic, which he bent to his use. 5. Marx's character and his path to communism. Karl Marx, as the world knows, was born in Trier, a venerable city in Rhineland-Prussia, in 1818, son of a distinguished jurist and grandson of a rabbi. Indeed, both of Marx's parents were descended from rabbis. Marx's father, Heinrich, was a liberal rationalist who felt no great qualms about his forced conversion to official Lutheranism in 1816. What is little known is that in his early years the baptized Karl was a dedicated Christian. In his graduation essays from the Trier Gymnasium in 1835, the very young Marx prefigured his later development. His essay on an assigned topic on the union of the faithful with Christ was orthodox evangelical Christian, but it also contained hints of the fundamental alienation theme that he would later find in Hegel. Marx's discussion of the necessity for union with Christ stressed that this union would put an end to the tragedy of God's alleged rejection of man. In a companion essay, Reflections of a Young Man on the Choice of a Profession, Marx expressed a worry about his own demon of ambition, of the great temptation he felt to inveigh against the deity and curse mankind. Going first to the University of Bonn and then off to the prestigious new University of Berlin to study law, Marx soon converted to militant atheism, shifted his major to philosophy, and joined a Doktorklub of young or left Hegelians, of which he soon became a leader and general secretary. The shift to atheism quickly gave Marx's demon of ambition full rein. Particularly revelatory of Marx's adult as well as youthful character are volumes of poems, most of them lost until a few were recovered in recent years. Historians, when they discuss these poems, tend to dismiss them as inchoate romantic yearnings, but they are too congruent with the adult Marx's social and revolutionary doctrines to be casually dismissed. Surely here seems to be a case where a unified, early plus late Marx is vividly revealed. Thus, in his poem Feelings, dedicated to his childhood sweetheart and later wife, Jenny von Westphalen, Marx expressed both his megalomania and his enormous thirst for destruction. Heaven I would comprehend, I would draw the world to me. Living, hating, I intend that my stars shine brilliantly. And, worlds I would destroy forever, since I can create no world, since my call they notice never. Here is a classical expression of Satan's supposed reason for hating and rebelling against God. In another poem, Marx writes of his triumph after he shall have destroyed God's created world. Then I will be able to walk triumphantly like a god through the ruins of their kingdom. Every word of mine is fire and action. My breast is equal to that of the Creator. And in his poem Invocation of One in Despair, Marx writes, I shall build my throne high overhead. Cold, tremendous shall its summit be. For its bulwark, superstitious dread. For its marshal, blackest agony. The Satan theme is most explicitly set forth in Marx's The Fiddler, dedicated to his father. "See this sword? The Prince of Darkness sold it to me." And, "With Satan I have struck my deal. He chalks the signs, beats time for me. I play the death march, fast and free." Particularly instructive is Marx's lengthy, unfinished poetic drama of this youthful period, Ulanim, a tragedy. In the course of this drama, his hero, Ulanim, delivers a remarkable soliloquy, pouring out sustained invective, a hatred of the world and of mankind, a hatred of creation, and a threat and vision of total world destruction. Thus Ulanim pours out his vials of wrath. "I shall howl gigantic curses on mankind. Ha! Eternity! She is an eternal grief. Ourselves being clockwork, blindly mechanical, made to be the foul calendars of time and space, having no purpose save to happen, to be ruined, so that there shall be something to ruin. If there is a something which devours, I'll leap within it, though I bring the world to ruins. The world which bulks between me and the abyss, I will smash to pieces with my enduring curses. I'll throw my arms around its harsh reality. Embracing me, the world will dumbly pass away, and then sink down to utter nothingness, perished, with no existence. That would be really living." And, "The leaden world holds us fast, and we are chained, shattered, empty, frightened, eternally chained to this marble block of being, and we are the apes of a cold God." All this reveals a spirit that often seems to animate militant atheism. In contrast to the non-militant variety, which expresses a simple disbelief in God's existence, militant atheism seems to believe implicitly in God's existence, but to hate him and to wage war for his destruction. Such a spirit was all too clearly revealed in the retort of the militant atheist Bakunin to the famous pro-theist remark of the deist Voltaire. If God did not exist, it would be necessary to create him, to which the demented Bakunin retorted, if God did exist, it would be necessary to destroy him. It was this hatred of God as a creator greater than himself that apparently inspired Karl Marx. Also prefiguring the man was a trait that Marx developed early in his youth and never relinquished, a shameless sponging on friends and relatives. Already in early 1837, Heinrich Marx, castigating his son Karl's wanton spending of the money of others, wrote to him that, "On one point you have wisely found fit to observe an aristocratic silence. I am referring to the paltry matter of money." Indeed, Marx took money from any source available, his father, mother, and throughout his adult life, his long-suffering friend and abject disciple Friedrich Engels, all of whom fueled Marx's capacity for spending money like water. An insatiable spender of other people's money, Marx continually complained about a shortage of financial means. While sponging on Engels, Marx perpetually complained to his friend that his largesse was never enough. Thus, in 1868, Marx insisted that he could not make do on an annual income of less than 400 to 500 pounds, a phenomenal sum, considering that the upper tenth of Englishmen in that period were earning an average income of only 72 pounds a year. Indeed, so profligate was Marx that he quickly ran through an inheritance from a German follower of 824 pounds in 1864, as well as a gift of 350 pounds from Engels in the same year. In short, Marx was able to run through the munificent sum of almost 1,200 pounds in 2 years, and 2 years later accept another gift of 210 pounds from Engels to pay off his newly accumulated debts. Finally, in 1868, Engels sold his share of the family cotton mill and settled upon Marx an annual pension of £350 from then on. Yet Marx's continual complaints about money did not abate. As in the case of many other spongers and cadgers throughout history, Karl Marx affected a hatred and contempt for the very material resource he was so anxious to cadge and use so recklessly. The difference is that Marx created an entire philosophy around his own corrupt attitudes toward money. Man, he thundered, was in the grip of the fetishism of money. The problem was the existence of this evil thing, not the voluntarily adopted attitudes of some people toward it. Money Marx reviled as the pander between human life and the means of sustenance, the universal whore. The utopia of communism was a society where this scourge, money, would be abolished. Karl Marx, the self-proclaimed enemy of the exploitation of man by man, not only exploited his devoted friend Friedrich Engels financially, but also psychologically. Thus, only 3 months after Marx's wife Jenny von Westphalen gave birth to his daughter Franziska in March 1851, their live-in maid, Helena Lenken de Muth, whom Marx had inherited from Jenny's aristocratic family, also gave birth to Marx's illegitimate son, Henry Frederick. Desperately anxious to keep up haute bourgeois conventions and to hold his marriage together, Karl never acknowledged his son, and instead persuaded Engels, a notorious womanizer, to proclaim the baby as his own. Both Marx and Engels treated the hapless Freddie extremely badly. Engels presumed resentment at being so used, providing him a rather better excuse. Marx boarded Freddie out continually and never allowed him to visit his mother. As Fritz Radatz, a biographer of Marx, declared, if Henry Frederick de Muth was Karl Marx's son, the new mankind's preacher lived an almost lifelong lie, and scorned, humiliated, and disowned his only surviving son. Engels, of course, picked up the tab for Freddie's education. Freddie was trained, however, to take his place in the working class, far from the lifestyle of his natural father, the quasi-aristocratic leader of the world's downtrodden revolutionary proletariat. Marx's personal taste for the aristocracy was lifelong. As a young man, he attached himself to his neighbor, Jenny's father, Baron Ludwig von Westphalen, and dedicated his doctoral thesis to the Baron. Indeed, the snobbish proletarian communist always insisted that Jenny imprint "Née von Westphalen" on her calling card.